Okay, let's dive into this. When you hear the name Singapore today, what pops into your head? Probably an island of billionaires, right? A skyline packed with gleaming skyscrapers, a massive hub for international trade. But what if I told you that just a few decades ago, this exact same place was little more than a muddy, swampy fishing settlement with literally zero natural resources? How on earth did an improbable swamp transform into a global economic powerhouse? And maybe more importantly, what steep sacrifices had to be made to get there?
60 years ago, the reality on the ground was just devastating. We're talking crippling poverty, widespread slums, and actual swamps. Yet today, Singapore boasts a staggering gross domestic product of $107,000 per capita. To put that into perspective for you, they are now the sixth wealthiest economy in the world per capita. They easily beat out their former colonial overlords, the British. It is absolutely a mind-blowing leap.
Section 1, From Swamp to the Top of the World. To really understand this economic miracle, we first have to grasp their brutal geography. At just 735 square kilometers, Singapore is incredibly tiny. It's not even a third the size of Luxembourg. Yet this tiny speck of land in Southeast Asia is densely packed with a population of 6 million people. There's almost zero natural space, no sprawling agricultural fields, no gold mines or oil wells to fall back on. Nothing. Well, they did have exactly one natural advantage, a highly strategic location right at the Strait of Malacca. Think about the physical goods sitting in your home right now. There is a massive chance they pass through this exact spot, because today about 30% of all global maritime trade flows right through it. The British actually realized this immense potential way back in 1819. They established a free port where ships could anchor and trade without heavy taxation. And this strategic move, it attracted a massive, diverse wave of immigrants seeking new lives, primarily from China, India, and Malaysia.
Section 2, Crisis and Forced Independence.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this early colonial growth absolutely did not guarantee success. After that British port era, 1942 brought a brutal Japanese occupation during World War II, which completely devastated the island's infrastructure. Fast forward to 1963, Singapore joins the Federation of Malaysia, hoping for some regional stability. But a mere 2 years later, in 1965, disaster strikes. They are completely, unceremoniously expelled from the Federation. So by 1965, a pivotal crisis hit. Let's be clear, independence here wasn't some joyous victory with fireworks. Singapore was literally kicked out of Malaysia due to deep racial, political, and economic tensions. The state was left in absolute peril. They were completely dependent on the very country that just expelled them for their drinking water and their food. They faced 14% unemployment, 50% illiteracy, zero natural resources, and they had absolutely no army while being totally surrounded by larger hostile neighbors. It looked like a completely doomed future.
Section 3, The Dictator's Recipe for Survival.
With their backs completely against the wall, a central figure emerged to engineer an escape route: Lee Kuan Yew. Serving as prime minister from 1959 to 1990, and often described as an enlightened dictator, Lee knew the country had absolutely nothing left to lose. If they failed, they would literally just slowly starve. So he implemented sweeping, radical, and highly authoritarian policies. His singular goal? Absolute state survival. And to achieve it, collective prosperity was prioritized far above individual freedoms.
Lee tackled these existential problems with sweeping, multi-layered solutions. First, they began capturing rainwater and researching desalination to end their crippling water dependence on Malaysia. Second, the state launched one of the most massive public housing projects in human history to eradicate the crime-ridden slums. And third, despite the incredibly diverse ethnic languages spoken on the island at the time, Lee simply mandated English as the universal language. This was brilliant. It effectively unified the population internally while completely preparing the workforce for global trade.
And this brilliantly illustrates the incredible impact of that public housing policy, which is still visible today. A massive 88% of Singaporeans are homeowners. 88%! By providing state-built, affordable apartments, the government gave citizens a literal, physical stake in the nation. Furthermore, they intentionally distributed this housing proportionally across ethnic groups. The goal? To dissolve racial ghettos, effectively forcing the creation of a unified Singaporean identity.
Section 4, A State Run Like a Corporation.
To fuel explosive growth, Lee Kuan Yew managed the country like a highly efficient business, creating a really fascinating dual reality. For foreign investors, the state offered incredibly low corporate taxes, slashed industrial and environmental regulations, and provided a perfectly stable strategic port. But in exchange, the reality for everyday citizens involved completely crushing labor unions and strikes, enforcing strict media censorship, and implementing draconian laws, including the death penalty for corruption. Basically, the state provided a ruthlessly clean and predictable environment in exchange for absolute obedience. So you're probably wondering, how did they fund this massive structural overhaul? The early money came from a few key streams. A major cash injection actually came from servicing the U.S. military during the Vietnam War, acting as a critical port for American ships and businesses. Then came a flood of foreign corporate investment, lured in by those favorable tax laws. But internally, the state introduced a mandatory 20% savings rate for all citizens. That forced savings pool was used directly to fund state development. And get this, today that fund averages roughly $300,000 per person. Now, what's really interesting here is that with extreme wealth comes the need to protect it. Despite being an incredibly tiny, land-starved island, a full 10% of Singapore's entire landmass is dedicated strictly to the military. By implementing mandatory military service and heavily investing their new wealth, they built a defense budget equal to that of Turkey, a major NATO power. It was all designed to deter any hostile neighbors from viewing the wealthy island as an easy target.
Section 5. The high toll for perfection.
But, as we know, creating a fortress of wealth does not come for free. Collective prosperity at the cost of individualism. This is the grim reality of the social contract we just discussed. The core problem is that the survival machine Lee Kuan Yew built, it never actually turned off. For 60 years, the population has been relentlessly pushed for higher and higher output. So over time, the economic miracle has slowly morphed into a claustrophobic, hyper-competitive nightmare for the average worker, where the pressure simply never, ever ends. This pressure begins incredibly early, inside a literal education pressure cooker. From as early as 7 years old, children are subjected to relentless standardized testing. They are continuously sorted based on their perceived talent, facing a grueling system of extra tutoring and midnight homework. There's this constant, terrifying fear of failing to secure one of the very limited spots in the elite tiers. Now, does this system produce incredible test scores? Yes, absolutely. But it actively crushes natural creativity and self-esteem in the process. So, the crucial point is that the ultimate consequence of all this pressure is reflected in one deeply alarming number: less than 1. This is Singapore's current birth rate, less than 1 child per woman. Despite having world-class healthcare and vast national wealth, the extreme exhaustion from the work culture, combined with soaring modern housing costs, has utterly decimated family growth. The workforce is just physically and emotionally drained, leading to intense workplace dissatisfaction. As a result, we are literally seeing the system fracture. It's a modern dilemma playing out in real time, holding vast lessons for other hyperproductive economies out there. They're facing a rapidly aging population and a birth rate far too low to replace them. Those once affordable public apartments, they are now skyrocketing into the millions due to sheer demand. To keep the economy running, the state relies heavily on a massive influx of foreign workers, which creates intense societal friction with the already exhausted local workforce. The very fabric Lee Kuan Yew wove is fraying right before our eyes. Which really leaves us asking one huge question. Will the Singapore model survive? The generation that lived through the 1965 crisis and readily accepted that authoritarian social contract in exchange for survival, they are passing away. Today's society faces not just an economic challenge, but a true existential psychological crisis. Can this incredible machine of prosperity adapt to a modern generation craving more freedom and less pressure? Or will the very structure that created the diamond ultimately shatter it? Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me. Keep questioning how the world around us is truly built.